Every story's gotta start somewhere, and my story with anime starts with Adult Swim. Now, Adult Swim's anime shows were by no means the first ones that I ever saw. Dragon Ball Z, Pokemon, Sailor Moon, stuff like that was all running throughout the 90s, and I was a huge Pokemon fan. But it was in 2001, very shortly after Adult Swim first began, that my cousin came to me with a volume of Anime Invasion magazine, the first volume at that, and basically was like, dude, anime. And I was like, oh, yeah! We had been introduced to the film Ninja Scroll a couple months earlier by an even older cousin. Boyd had gotten obsessed with that film and with anime in general, had found this magazine, probably because it had Dragon Ball on the cover, it had Goku, and it was about all the stuff that had gotten cut from the American broadcast of Dragon Ball, just explaining everything that was present in the original. And so he had learned about anime conceptually, spread this news to me, and tells me there's this block called Adult Swim, which has all these cool anime shows. He was particularly attracted to YuYu Hakusho. So we sit down at Saturday night, and I believe the original Adult Swim lineup went like this. First, you had Cowboy Bebop. Now, I think the first time that we saw the show on Adult Swim, it might have actually been episode 2. It may have been Stray Dog Strut, which is one of the more fun episodes, which I think is how I was able to get into it, because I remember I got into Cowboy Bebop pretty quickly, in spite of the fact that a lot of the episodes are a little bit more dark and more adult and nuanced than what 12-year-old me would have appreciated. Not even 12, 11-year-old me. Wait, not even 11, 10-year-old me. Shit. So yeah, 10-year-old me was watching Cowboy Bebop, and I remember thinking it was a pretty fun time. Then we had YuYu Hakusho, which I was very easily able to get into because it's a cool action show. I mean, it's intended for kids my age at the time, though it still holds up to this day, I think, is a fantastic show, which I would not have guessed before I watched it again. Honestly, like, for the longest time, well, I'll get into that later. After those two, I believe the third one, which this was a horribly misguided decision on Adult Swim's part, and a big part of why I never got to see the later shows that came on, because the third show was Pilot Candidate, which was boring as shit and a terrible show. I have no idea why that was their third choice. I think because it had mechs, and I guess they just thought mechs would work out, or I don't know. No one remembers this show, by the way. Like, West or East, I've never heard anyone talk about it. I've never once in the last 10 years seen anyone fucking mention Pilot Candidate. The show was garbage. I think it was only 11 episodes long, and it had like no real conclusion. Like I remember they ran the whole show. I saw it through to the end, and it just kind of, nothing fucking happened. It sucked balls. Maybe if I rewatched it now, maybe there was actually some kind of like weird hidden depth to it that I never understood as a kid, but like, God, again, if that was the case, I'm sure someone would have talked about it at some point. Then they would run Mobile Suit Gundam 0080 War in the Pocket, which is a phenomenal 6-episode OVA. I think they ran through it 2 or 3 times before they replaced it with the original Mobile Suit Gundam series. I never watched enough of it to like understand it because it just seemed kind of out of my depth, and I always felt like there was more to it that I wasn't getting. I think I had missed episode 1 and I just was completely lost, so I just didn't get that show at all. And then after that would be Outlaw Star, which from what little episodes I actually did manage to watch of it seemed really cool. It seemed like a show I would get into, but I was never able to fucking sit through Pilot Candidate and Gundam in order to make it there, because Pilot Candidate sucked. And then finally they would wrap it up with Tenchi Muyo, which had originally been on Toonami, a lot more heavily censored, and then they just put it on Adult Swim where it made a lot more sense. Which, by the way, Toonami at the time consisted of like Dragon Ball Z, Sailor Moon, I don't remember what else was on there because I usually was in school up like through most of Toonami, and it just never had shows that I really cared about, whereas Adult Swim, I very quickly became enamored with Bebop and YuYu Hakusho. And both of those are shows that I feel like I have a much more amicable relationship with. Cowboy Bebop is a show, though, that, like most of what I've talked about in this podcast series, is one that I am kind of terrified of returning to, and yet I've still managed to talk about a shocking amount. You may be surprised to hear I have not watched Cowboy Bebop since 2009. I have not rewatched the show in its entirety since then. I have rewatched episode 1 when I bought it on Blu-ray, and I watched it at the very beginning of 2015, and I had planned to write about the show because this was in a period where I still had the mindset that if I'm going to cover a classic show or one of my favorites, I have to say absolutely everything. I can't leave any stone left unturned. As I talked about back in the Manabi Straight episode, back when I was younger, I had this kind of mindset like it was so hard to approach my favorites, and I just wasn't good enough of a writer or didn't know how to just get into it, get into the bones of it. And with Bebop especially, because it's such an episodic series, it's hard to find the right through line, like how much is too much, or how much is too little to say about this classic show. And I rewatched episode 1, and I enjoyed it, but I was just like, I have nothing to say about this episode. Like, or if I do anything I could say about it, I don't know how to structure it. I don't know what it would be. I really quickly had this sinking feeling like, oh God, I can't do justice to Cowboy Bebop. And that was a very scary feeling, and it kept me from watching the rest of the show. Like, just that feeling. Sometimes I rewatch a show or just watch a new one, and from episode 1, I already know, like, this is going to be something I can talk about, or I'm already thinking about my approach. And thank God this eventually happened with Evangelion, and this was at the same time I was planning to do like a gigantic Evangelion thing where I was going to do like a series of podcasts about every single episode of the show with all these guests, and then compile all this information and try to make a novel-length analysis of Eva. And it was later that year where I finally just went, okay, instead of letting this project get so fucking giant that it's impossible to do, why don't I strip it back and just make a series of videos about Eva and just make it about whatever topics come to mind in the process of watching it. So I watched a couple episodes and I went, oh, okay, I have a lot to say about just the animation cuts in the first episode, or I have a lot to say about the tone of episodes 3 and 4. Like I found things to say about episodes and I'd write about them. With Bebop, I still haven't done something like that, and I had these moments where I would think of something I really wanted to talk about with the series, but I'm scared that rewatching it will make it go away in the way that I've been saying throughout this podcast. So instead, I talked about the show in ways that I could get away with that. The video, You're Gonna Carry That Weight, the whole idea of it is that it's couched in memories. It's about the fact that so much of the show is so unforgettable, the way it worms into my psyche and keeps reminding me of these specific emotions. You don't have to rewatch the show to talk about how it made you feel back then. So yeah, I didn't rewatch the show. I just wrote that post. I've talked about the character designs for a whole video. I had my Tracing the Legacy of Cowboy Bebop, which was from 2014. Yeah, 2014. So even earlier than that. I've had a video where I used some of the music when I was talking about Tsuneo Imahori. Like, I bring up Cowboy Bebop all the time for a show that I haven't seen in its entirety in 8 fucking years. But that's because Cowboy Bebop was a mainstay of Adult Swim for a very long time. That was the first Adult Swim show. The whole block kind of spawned out of that show, and they would run it for years and years, and I would always watch it. Every Saturday night that it came on, I would check it out. And so I've seen some of those episodes 5+ times, and that's not including times that I would just later watch the show in its entirety. So a significant amount of the series is ingrained into my mind. I can tell you the titles of a lot of the episodes. And that's the thing. When I was younger, I was very obsessed with form. I still am, but back then, extremely so. What I mean by this is that anything that I got into, I poured over the structure of it. So, for instance, that Anime Invasion magazine, I read every word of the magazine. That includes the credits and the little, like, advertisement notations and stuff. Like, everything about it, I took in all of it. For a very long time, I was trying to make my own magazine. I still would love to, but the print media is dead, so there's no point. But I really wanted to make my own magazine, mostly because I wanted that structure. I wanted to make a book that opens with, like, fan mail responses, and then goes into top 10 lists that are fan voted, and then goes into like this subject and that subject, and there's the reviews in the back, the special features. Like, the form of a magazine is what I have so much obsession with, which is why I've wanted to start up a series about anime magazines, and I still plan to, but that's what always intrigued me the most. And I talk about this because when it came to Adult Swim, there's a clear form. You notice how I named all 6 shows in the order that they aired, and I could do that for a lot of the first few years of Adult Swim's existence because it was the fact that it came on Saturday nights and it had this clear structure to it that made it so fascinating and made it so, I could sort of memorize it and get deeply invested in it and know the names of the episodes of Cowboy Bebop and just do all this kind of extensive research. I was all about memorizing things, memorizing the odd formal details, not so much the meanings of things or what happens, but more the what of it. Like, what is this episode? Who's in it? Which characters are in which episodes? Stuff like that. So you had Cowboy Bebop. Then you had YuYu Hakusho, which I always liked YuYu Hakusho a lot, but the thing is that they would rerun the first arc a lot of times before they finally continued to the Dark Tournament. And the first arcs of YuYu Hakusho are not nearly as good as the Dark Tournament. So when you go through the Makai World arc, or whatever it was called, where this arc, I mean, it's not that bad if you watch it in marathon form, because it's like a series of fights with each of the 4 main characters. Basically, they go to this demon world, and first, Kurama fights a guy for like an episode, Kuwabara fights a guy for like 3 episodes, then Hiei fights a guy for an episode, and then Yusuke fights a guy for like 4 episodes, and that's the arc. It's alright, it's pretty generic shonen battle stuff, like, it's definitely the weakest point in Yu Yu Hakusho. But if you sit down and watch that all at once, it's like, sure, 10 episodes in the middle of a 112 episode show. You can watch them in a day. If you're watching those 10 episodes over the course of 10 weeks and then they repeat all of them, then you've got months of this arc. And it's not that I didn't enjoy the arc, it's just that it's slower than it needs to be and they repeated it at least once. So yeah, Yu Yu Hakusho was not as high of a priority for me as Cowboy Bebop was, because Bebop was always fresh and exciting. Every episode was totally different, something new. You were never like watching Yusuke fight the same guy 4 weeks in a row. You were always getting a different kind of story, most of which were great, nearly all of which are great. So I know Pilot Candidate got replaced. I think Pilot Candidate may have been the one replaced with the original Gundam. I know that after 0080 was over, original Gundam was on. Pilot Candidate may have been the one replaced with InuYasha. That or there was something between them. But eventually it became that the third show was InuYasha. So we had Bebop, Yu Yu Hakusho, InuYasha, and I think the other 3 were still the same. Mobile Suit Gundam, Outlaw Star, Tenchi Muyo. If something else came in place of Tenchi Muyo, I don't know what it was, because I would very rarely stay up that late. Now, InuYasha I was way into. In fact, I think it was probably my favorite for a while, because this one is just about a fucking badass demon guy fighting shit. It's the ultimate shonen du jour series. Like, Yu Yu Hakusho was really cool, but I don't think I related that much to the characters in that series, because Yusuke was kind of like a punk, and the other characters they all felt older than me. Like, it's funny because when I was a kid, I always saw like high schoolers as way older than me, because you have to realize, I don't know if you've ever seen my video proof that I was once a lolly shota, but I was the tiniest, girliest looking kid that there ever is. I was the shortest kid in my class all the way up until high school. I was this really just tiny, little, skinny, girly-looking kid. And when I say girly-looking, I fucking mean it. I had really long hair, and I look at myself and think it's a girl. So I didn't relate all that well to hyper-masculine characters. I didn't relate all that well to punks or hard-asses and stuff like that. Like, I always preferred the smart characters, the ones who were, like, younger or more intelligent, but I also loved, like, just brash, fun action. And so InuYasha, even though the main character was Kagome, ostensibly, I think I mostly just saw it as InuYasha being the main character, because I think I missed the first episode. And he I think the first episode I saw was either 2 or 3 where he uses the Blades of Blood, which I thought was the coolest fucking attack ever, and it only shows up once. InuYasha has his main attack is Iron Reaver Soul Stealer, which is an attack where his claws like glow yellow and he attacks people. And then he eventually gets a sword called the Tetsaiga, which obviously was awesome because it's a big ass sword, and he uses the Tetsaiga's Wind Scar attack, and then later he learns the Backlash Wave. Rumiko Takahashi, as a manga artist, her thing is that she'll give her characters a main attack, and then they gain one new main attack every like 100 chapters or so, and they all do the same thing. It's pointless. Like there's no fucking reason for it. I don't even know why she bothers naming the attacks because they're all retarded. There's no creativity to them whatsoever. She's not a good battle manga artist, which is probably why InuYasha sucks balls. But it didn't to me at the time. And in episode 2 or 3, InuYasha gets cut, and he reaches into the cut and he gets like blood on his fingers, and he says Blades of Blood, and he like launches his blood as blades, and it was fucking cool, and he never does it again. It's so fucking aggravating. So the early episodes of InuYasha are Monster of the Week stuff, where it's just like a new thing shows up, InuYasha fights it, cool as shit. Again, remember that the biggest problem facing Yu Yu Hakusho in my mind is that 4 weeks go by and Yusuke's still fighting the same fucking guy. So InuYasha, at least in the beginning, he's fighting lots of different guys. He's making new friends, they get all these adventurers, Shippo and Moroku, each of them got some kind of unique capability. This is a cool show. It's fun. InuYasha starts off okay. InuYasha really goes downhill as soon as they introduce the central villain, which is Naraku, because he's the central villain for the whole fucking show, and the reasons that they can't fight him are just total bullshit. Most of InuYasha is excuses for why we haven't killed Naraku yet, the show. It quickly gets old and boring and shitty. But again, as a kid, I loved it. I thought it was the coolest shit in the world. And I think it's because InuYasha is so obviously bad to me now that I didn't expect Yu Yu Hakusho to be great. Like, looking back on it, I hadn't seen it for 15 years when I watched it more recently. I just expected it to be, you know, another shonen action show that I enjoyed as a kid that I wouldn't like now. Which, incidentally, most shonen action shows are great. Most of them hold up, most of them stand the test of time, most of them are worth watching. It's only certain ones, like your InuYashas or your Fairy Tales, which I mean, I've never even seen Fairy Tail, I only know this secondhand, but like the stuff that people end up reviling, the stuff that people revisit years later and go, what the fuck was I thinking? Or the ones that go downhill, like Bleach, where it starts off great and then it just eventually kind of, you know, fades off, which I guess you could say about InuYasha, but I think InuYasha gets pretty bad pretty quick. And even though I eventually saw Hunter x Hunter, the 2011 version, I watched it in 2014, and I absolutely loved it. I wasn't sure how much of that was the anime adaptation. You know, it was a very solid Madhouse adaptation, been readapted from before. I had heard that the original had a lot more filler, and, like, the original Hunter x Hunter anime, like, now I've heard a lot of people say that they like it even more than the newer one. It definitely has better artwork, but, you know, it was not a show that people talked about all that much. People didn't give it the super high praise. It was completely obscure. I'd never heard anybody talk about it. It was when the 2011 one came out that people made a big deal about it. I don't know if that's just from underexposure or what, but, you know, it left me with this impression like this was a great anime adaptation. And even if the original manga is great, and even if Yu Yu Hakusho's original manga is great, is the anime great? And there was a couple of things that inspired me to finally watch the Yu Yu Hakusho anime again in 2015. The first of those was that I found this article on Anime News Network, but it was about a article from, I think, Animage magazine. It was one of the big magazines in Japan, where they had like a viewer voted, ranked, or something like that, top 100 anime of all time. Maybe it was even like maybe it wasn't a magazine, maybe it was like a museum of I don't know, it was some kind of important sounding top 100 list, and it was really interesting because it was mostly like classics, and when I say classics, I mean like 1960s and 70s classics, you know, like shit like Haku Jaden that like no one in America even knows about, but is like direly important to the history of anime film. And on that list is Yu Yu Hakusho. And I was kind of like, huh, so Yu Yu Hakusho is considered like a classic. That's interesting. And then one day I was at a friend's house visiting, and for no particular reason, he was playing Yu Yu Hakusho dubbed on his like PS3 on the TV, and he was playing the first few episodes, and I was like, this is fucking great. This is awesome. Even this dub is awesome. I love this. What the hell? This is as good as I remember thinking it was as a kid. And so eventually I just sat down and started watching it, and it was like, it was magnificent. I had a great time. Ended up watching the whole fucking show. Absolutely loved it. Even more so than I liked it as a kid, because back then I saw it as a cool action show, especially the Dark Tournament, and I could remember most of the stuff that had happened when I was watching it again. But what I didn't recognize as a kid is the amazing character arc of Yusuke Urameshi, and even just how great of a character he is from the beginning. He's got a lot of nuance to him for a punk kid, and the whole show is about this measurable growth that he goes through in each arc. He's always improving a little bit and becoming more mature until by the very end he is a fucking adult, and he's completely different from what he was at the start. And it's really great. Great fucking show. One of my favorites. Togashi's a real-life genius. Level E is good, too, which is the one he did briefly in between Yu Yu Hakusho and Hunter x Hunter, and had a great anime adaptation by David Production. But yeah, InuYasha doesn't hold up, and Rumiko Takahashi's other stuff does a lot better. Ranma 1/2 is a fun show. That one has its issues in that there are at least like 40 episodes you should not watch because they are dog shit. Because that show is repetitive and dumb and has lots of throwaway filler bullshit. But overall, it's still got a lot of great episodes. I made a Ranma 1/2 episode guide once, so if you ever want to get into that show, go to my blog and type Ranma episode guide and into the search bar and look that up. It's 160 episodes, and there's only 60 that you really need to watch. So InuYasha had started in like 2002, and it's in 2003 that Adult Swim finally gets kind of shaken up a bit, and Cartoon Network adds a bunch more anime. This is where we get that Saturday block that I talked about in one of the earlier episodes, where now we've got Rerunning Kenshin starts airing, which I got hugely into because I thought nothing was cooler than swords, and oh my god, it was a whole show about fucking swords. So many of my favorite characters at the time were from that show. I had a birthday cake with Hajime Saito on it. Sota Sojiro, because he was like a young genius character I loved. Kenshin himself was great. I knew all the attacks. I started playing with swords, by which I mean sticks, all the time. Yeah, I was really obsessed with Kenshin. And then there was the Samurai X OVAs, which are even more badass. That was my favorite anime for a while. We got G Gundam, which was awesome. SD Gundam, which I did enjoy. I'm trying to think what the fuck else was on that block. I don't remember, but Adult Swim underwent a major change in that I think Bebop was still airing. Yu Yu Hakusho might have still been going, and InuYasha. I don't remember when those changed out, but they added in Fooly Cooly, which I very immediately was into and would continue to be for a long time. Fooly Cooly was one of the first shows I ever taped, because at some point I realized I could tape the shows on Adult Swim in case I wasn't able to stay up late enough to watch them. So I had a VHS tape which with each episode of FLCL on it that I watched a few times, and I think I was missing episode 4, and so the story was especially confusing to me because I was missing part of it for a long time that I just hadn't seen as much. That, or I deliberately skipped it because that episode was more sexual and I remember being uncomfortable about it. I mean, the whole show is full of sexual innuendo. I think most of it just went over my head when I was young. I can say with a little bit more confidence that I still love Fooly Cooly. The last time I watched it was 2011, but I've seen that show like 12 times, and I wrote about it extensively on my blog in 2009. It's the first show I ever like in-depth analyzed, and yeah, one day I'll finally make a video about it. That's the only case where I did, in 2011 when I rewatched it, I had the feeling that I've been describing in this whole podcast of like, like, I watched it again and it didn't mean as much to me, and I felt like I wouldn't make the same points about it now that I would have back then. But this is the one case where that's okay, because I wrote the full analysis of it back in 2009. So whatever thoughts I had about the show back then, they are out. There is no air that needs to be cleared. You know, the perspective of 16-year-old Digibro is preserved forever. 18-year-old Digibro is preserved forever on my blog. And if I write about it now, I don't have to worry about that. I can focus entirely on what 25, probably maybe will be 26 by the time I actually cover the show, thinks about the show. So that's great. Thank God. No hard feelings there. I know they brought on Blue Gender, which I was never very into because it was just a bit too dark for me because it has lots of character death and, like, why would I get invested in the characters if they're all gonna die? Around here we got Trigun, and Trigun quickly became one of my favorite shows as well. Another badass action show with a really memorable main character. There was a period of time where I considered Trigun to be my favorite anime, but not this period, because it did stay on Adult Swim for a while. Trying to remember what else was on there. It gets a little bit more difficult at this point because here is where my cousin Boyd started having an allowance and he started buying anime DVDs. So at this point, we no longer just had to watch Adult Swim shows. We could now watch whatever Boyd could afford. Oh, Knights of the Zodiac, which is the American title of Saint Seiya. That was on that Saturday block, the one before Adult Swim. Never watched a whole lot of it, though. I remembered that because Boyd bought one of the DVDs. So at this point, we started watching stuff like Cryed. I know Boyd bought a Fist of the North Star DVD. I'm not going to name them all. He bought a million DVDs. Like, we would usually buy a different show each time. We've almost never completed a DVD set because we wanted to see so many different shows that we just keep buying Volume 1 and, like, maybe Volume 2 if it was a show that Boyd really liked. And then I also started buying DVDs. I know I was buying Hellsing and Samurai Deeper Kyo, neither of which I finished, and eventually I resold those along with most of the DVDs I would ever buy in the early days because most of the shows turned out to suck. So it's a little blurrier at this point what was on Adult Swim, what was just something I watched on DVD. But I remember that there was a period where I got into video games and I sort of drifted away from anime. I stopped seeing Boyd because he moved away. We moved somewhere else, my family. And I was just so into games, I would watch a lot of G4 and a lot less Cartoon Network. And I remember there was this very surreal moment where I'm watching Adult Swim and most of the shows have changed, and I didn't know it. So in 2005, we get Full Metal Alchemist starts airing, which I did get pretty into. I really enjoyed it. Paranoia Agent starts airing, which I thought was fucking awesome. Like, that show was so close to being over my head, and I'm sure there was parts of it I didn't get, but I just remember that, like, by the end of it, I was totally enraptured. I think it was really the whole episode where they go into the video game, like Lil Slugger and the detectives are sucked into like a video game, that was the one that was like my favorite because they were in a video game, of course. That episode's actually like the worst one of the whole show. It's got the worst animation and stuff, and it's just kind of almost filler, but I loved it as a kid, and that reminded me of Dot Hack, which was the other show on that block before Adult Swim that I forgot to mention. I don't know how I did, since that's the whole reason I brought it up the first time in this podcast series. But that's the one I was missing. I think that's all of them. I think I named them all at this point. Also, around this point, Toonami had come back with a vengeance and was airing anime shows. YuYu Hakusho moved to Toonami, and therefore I never ended up seeing any of the third major arc because I just didn't get to watch Toonami. Rerunning Kenshin moved to Toonami, so I never saw most of the Shishio arc, which is supposed to be the best part of the show. The Kyoto arc, rather. I mean, I saw a bunch of it, but yeah, because of when I had school, like when I got out of school, I wasn't able to watch the Toonami shit as much. So that was a huge disappointment. And then eventually they replaced Toonami with Mizugi or Miguzi, something like that, which was like half anime, half not. Maybe not even at all. I know they had like Code Lyoko and Totally Spies, which are not anime, but I think there was an anime show on there. G Gundam might have moved to Toonami as well. But anyways, Adult Swim had FMA, which I loved, Paranoia Agent, which I loved. They picked up Cryed, And even though I had really enjoyed the first 10 episodes on DVD, I never actually caught the show on Adult Swim. That might have actually started later. That might not have been 2005. They were still running Trigun, and that was when Trigun became my favorite anime, and I don't even really know why. I think it was just, like, conceptually I was into it. Like, this was a period where I wasn't really connected with a lot of the shows that had previously been my favorites. I don't remember if they had stopped airing Cowboy Bebop, but they probably had, and therefore, like, I had this growing sense of distance from, like, Bebop and Yu Yu Hakusho. InuYasha was still on, but it sucked balls at this point, and I knew it. Rurouni Kenshin I hadn't been able to see in a while, you know. So, like, a lot of the anime I considered favorites weren't still on TV, and Trigun was. So that's probably a big part of why it became my favorite one. Ghost in the Shell standalone complex started up. I didn't understand that show at all, and didn't enjoy it. Whatever else was on, I probably wasn't watching. And there was also some anime on, like, TV and stuff. Again, Boogie Pop Phantom, Gatekeepers 21, I remember watching and enjoying. So it gets a little hazier at that point. But, like, that early period of Adult Swim, like, so much of my memory of being a teen was about that staying up all night watching Adult Swim. Like, because they would air all these shows twice. They would go through the whole lineup, and then they would go through the same episodes again, like, all of it over again. And so I would see a lot of these shows, you know, if I did stay up all night, which eventually became something that I would do. Like, early on, I would rarely get to see the later shows, but as I grew older, when I was probably like 13 or 14, it was a lot easier for me to stay up into the wee hours of night. And so I would watch the entire run of Adult Swim twice, which is why there's episodes of some of those shows that I've seen, like, you know, 5-10 times, because I both, like, you know, 2 different times that they aired, I watched it both times over the course of the night. And that's how I know so much of Bebop like the back of my hand. Me and my cousin, we used to call each other on the phone like every day, because, you know, he would be at my house every weekend, and we'd watch all that anime, and then we would call each other up just to talk about how cool anime is, and we ended all of our calls by going, "Anime forever!" And, like, in that exact voice, like, no louder than that. "Anime forever!" You know? It's just that's how I felt about about anime. Just, it was all that mattered to me. It really occupied my entire mind for about 2 years, and I started going on forums, started going on otaku boards and discussing these shows with people online. And Boyd did a lot of online research. Like, most of the DVDs that he bought were based on stuff he'd read about online or in magazines, you know. Oh, Shonen Jump started publishing around that time. Oh, that brings me to, like, around the same time as when Adult Swim made their big lineup change and Cartoon Network had all those shows, we got the Fox Box, which was airing a bunch of anime. They had Ultimate Muscle, they had Fighting Foodons, they had Kirby's Right Back at Ya, Shaman King came a little later. I don't remember what else. I think they had a couple other anime. I never watched as much of the Fox Box because all of it was, like, really bad kiddie dubs. And WB would air anime. I don't remember what shows they had at the time. Yu-Gi-Oh! Yeah, Yu-Gi-Oh! Was out by then. So yeah, Yu-Gi-Oh! Would come on, and I think they had another one I don't remember. But yeah, so this was like a really golden age of anime on TV. Like, you had the stuff leading up to Adult Swim, the stuff that was on Adult Swim, the stuff on that morning on Fox Box and WB, so there was just a lot of anime on TV at the time, so it was a lot more viable for that to have been, like, my main source of anime. And then Shonen Jump was publishing, so you had, in the beginning, Shaman King, Naruto, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Yu Yu Hakusho, Dragon Ball Z, One Piece. I don't remember what else. Back then, when I thought Big 3, I had thought of it as Naruto, Shaman King, and One Piece, because those were the 3 that weren't on TV yet. Like, everything else in the magazine was already airing on TV, like the anime adaptations were airing, but Naruto, One Piece, and Shaman King didn't have that yet. So that's why I said Shaman King came a little later, and I didn't like the Shaman King anime because of the terrible dubbing. And then later, One Piece started and also had terrible dubbing. And then Naruto started and also had terrible dubbing. So yeah, all 3 of them, I ended up hating the anime adaptations. Bleach, came to the magazine a little bit later, and it started around the same time as Paranoia Agent and FMA Brother, or Fullmetal Alchemist rather, and I didn't like the Bleach anime at all. What eventually tore me away from all of it was simply that in 2006 my family moved into a house where we couldn't afford cable anymore. And I remember being so distraught because Fullmetal Alchemist, they had aired the first 26 episodes, and then they aired them all again, and I had used that chance to catch up with the story and fill in all the gaps that I hadn't seen the first time. So I was all caught up and ready to continue on Fullmetal Alchemist, and we moved like right before they were going to start new episodes. So that's why that show, which could very well have become my favorite at the time, did not end up becoming it, although had I seen the second half of the show, who knows how I would have felt, because I certainly hate it now. And by the time the 6 months had passed, it's exactly the same experience that I described with Yuri in the Yuri episode of this, which is that sensation of watching the ship, and then the second you turn your head, the ship has already sailed. Although in this case, I was like riding the ship, I guess, and then I don't know how to make this metaphor make sense. The point is that I turned my head away for 6 months because we had to move, and by the time I had cable again, I didn't know any of the shows that were on there anymore. Like, it was all a bunch of stuff that I was either way behind on, like Fullmetal Alchemist, where it was like, well, now I don't know what the fuck's going to be happening in the show, or InuYasha for that matter, though I'd gotten out of that show mostly by this point anyways. I think Escryed had started airing in that time, and maybe that's why I didn't watch it on TV. Evangelion, I think, might have aired around this time on Adult Swim. But point being, by the time I had cable back, I didn't care anymore. Adult Swim was dead to me. I would catch glimpses of it here and there, and eventually it became Toonami again, because Toonami had died in the meantime, and now it's still around. It's Toonami now, and it's got whatever big show is on. Like, I mean, there would never, in the modern day, there would never be a reason for me to watch Toonami. Aside from the fact that I don't even have cable, and I don't care about TV at all, there's never an anime I don't know about anymore. Like, back then, all of those were shows that I had never seen. All of them were shows that I didn't know anything about. Every time a new show came to Adult Swim, it was a completely fresh experience. It had a chance to make an impression on me from the get-go. You know, none of them were shows I knew about before, and I would just get enraptured in the plot watching it each week. And now I can easily watch any show at the drop of a hat. Yeah, that's right, I actually said drop of a hat instead of drop of a dime. I caught myself for once. And most of the shows that get brought there I've seen years ago. Like, what was the most recent big pickup? One Punch Man a year after it aired. They had Kill La Kill year and a half after it aired. Like, the only reason you'd watch Toonami now is if you just, like, somehow don't know about internet streaming, or you just happen to be someone who watches it. Like, you just watch TV in general, which is a dying breed, and one that I'm certainly not a part of, which is kind of sad. It's a little upsetting. Like, I still think it's cool that Toonami exists. I'm glad that there's an anime show around that could be introducing new generations to cool shows. I'm glad that I feel like Adult Swim has always had some degree of taste. Like, they have had shitty shows on there, and they seem to be derisive of their own shitty shows. But there's definitely this sense that the people who run Adult Swim really care about getting certain shows on there. There's a reason Cowboy Bebop and Fooly Cooly ran continuously, because the people running the block really cared about those shows. They would hype them up all the time. When one of them was going to be coming back onto the channel, they'd make like a big deal about it in the like the pre-show text and stuff, and be like, "Oh, we're returning one of our classics, one of our favorite shows, one of the greatest soundtracks of all time." You know, like, they'd really hype up those shows as they're, "Oh man, we're so excited, we get to run this again." And so, usually the stuff that gets picked up, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's just whatever's the zeitgeist of the time, but usually it's the good zeitgeist, you know, like Kill La Kill and One Punch Man, both great shows that I'd be excited to see more people find out about. Don't really care that Tokyo Ghoul's on there, but, you know, you take what you can get. You win some, you lose some. Some people like Tokyo Ghoul. I'm sure it's appealing to a lot of their audience. Dead Man Wonderland, a bunch of bullshit. They ran Kekaishi on there briefly. I don't think anyone cared about it at all. Nobody watched it. I picked up on a lot of the anime that ran on Cartoon Network in the time since 2006, mostly because my brothers would have it on in their rooms all the time. But from 2007 onwards, I was purely an internet boy. So, yeah, this story really just runs up, like, in spite of the fact that Adult Swim hasn't gone anywhere, the story just runs up to where the rest of these began. Like, it's really 2001 to 2007 is my whole history with the program. Most of the shows I have had a chance to return to, and so I have pretty concrete opinions of them. Obviously, my favorite show that ever ran on the damn network is Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex, the one that I wanted nothing to do with at the time, and then later it became one of my favorite shows of all time. Even probably above Cowboy Bebop, though I haven't, again, rewatched it since 2009 to say for sure. But yeah, that was kind of the core of my anime taste, and again, there was plenty of DVDs and manga and all this other shit that was ancillary to it, but everything revolved around the Saturday night. Everything revolved around that day that Boyd would come over and we'd stay up and try to watch these shows. I mean, even with all the DVDs, we watched them around Adult Swim, or we watched them either after the first wave of the shows had come on, or if there was a show we didn't care about, like, if we were just watching to see Bebop, YuYu Hakusho, and InuYasha, we didn't care what was coming afterwards, then we'd just play the DVDs over that. But that was the core of my anime watching experience. So anyways, that was something a little bit different than the rest, since it was really more of a retrospective than a particular emotional response to something, or something I feel like I can't say anymore, since a lot of those are shows I've talked about since, or could. I think I can eventually watch Cowboy Bebop and talk about it more. I've already done so much without even watching it, and I will probably talk about Fooly Cooly. So, I don't know about Trigun, but I don't think I ever had much to say about it in the first place. All of these are shows that I watched before I started my anime blog, so there's not that sense of, like, me having wanted to review these badly. They're just stuff that was around. Now, for our next episode, we're going to get really climactic, and we're going to talk about the one show that exists in between the Adult Swim era and the 2007 era, a show that I watched completely in a sea, all by itself, at a time when I wasn't watching anime at all, when I was in between hobbies, when I was very depressed, when I was at my emotionally weakest, and which meant the absolute world to me. I am, of course, talking about Neon Genesis Evangelion. So stay tuned for that, and I'll see you in the next one.